I guess we can get started. First of all, thank you everyone for joining yet another session of ours for Open Branding Month. I really appreciate you guys being here and following along. Like I've been saying, it's great to see how good the response is for what we're trying to do, trying to give everybody just like a daily dose of some branding knowledge rather than what we would have done if it was possible, which is obviously the physical event that is Rebels and Rulers. But I have to say that the turnout worldwide has been amazing. So welcome to everyone from wherever you might be. Today we have with us Amy, who you might know if you watched the video, and if you went to Rebels and Rulers last year, you might know her as Chief Intelligence Officer at Droga 5. But what you might not have known is that at the beginning of this year, she actually made a little bit of a shift, and we'll talk about that. But she's now Senior Vice President, Head of Analytics, Modeling, and Insights at Bank of America. And so welcome, Amy. Thank you for being here with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, you guys know me by now, and you know that I have my questions and I have kind of what I'd like to talk to Amy about. But if you have any questions along the way, then please do send them via the Q&A function in the Zoom, if you're on Zoom, or in the chat function via Facebook. And I'll be sure to introduce whatever thoughts or questions you might have into the conversation as best as I can and make sure that we get those answered. So without further ado, let's get started. I think given what I just mentioned about how you switch roles, I'd really like for you to maybe start by just telling us a little bit about the journey that is shifting from agency side to client side. What are, let's say, some of the biggest differences, good and bad, that you've experienced, to the limit that you can talk about them, because I'm sure it might be in some cases a sensitive subject.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. It's a journey I swore I would never take. I was like diehard agency person. I stayed in agencies for 20 some odd years and was like, I'm never doing that. And then I started talking to Bank of America, and it was over like many months. And at first I was like, I'm just curious what kind of people they hire. I think I'll go see. I had no intention of actually doing it. And as I talked to each person, I was more and more inspired by the things that I would be able to do, where I sat in a world of advertising agencies where I got to take like the first two steps of everything, right? I could think about who I wanted to target. I could think about what messages, channels, et cetera, experiences, but I didn't get to go all the way, right? I had these great ideas of like, we should do this product, or we should, and as I started talking more and more to Bank of America, I realized I would have the power to impact so many more things than I do now. And I think that's where agencies are headed. It's just, I jumped and did it a little faster because I think agencies are moving there more every day. But it's been a really interesting shift. Like everyone, it's been a weird year. I started in the beginning of January. In the beginning of March, I was sent home. So I worked 8 weeks in my new job, and then not in the same office as any of my team. So a strange way of working, and I've been at home ever since. But it's the things that are different, I guess. The span of the things that you can impact are so wildly different. Now I can think about, do we want to build a different product bundle? During a pandemic, do we want to have certain CAP programs, and who needs assistance programs, and who needs those, and how do we build them, and what do we offer? So there's things like that I never would have thought about, but there's also the number of times I sat at my desk and thought, why is my client not calling me back? This has to be the most important thing. And then I realized and I am in the marketing department, and yet like the marketing part is such a small bit of the things that you do. And you have all these other responsibilities that I now have like so much more empathy for my clients, who I was always so agitated that they weren't calling me back. And now I realize they were probably in meetings, because that's the other big difference is we love a meeting. It's all day long, every day. And then you do your work outside of those hours, but it's in other ways, it's so much the same. I think I'm surrounded by people who want to do better for their clients. It's just that our clients are end users, not the in between. People who are thriving on creativity, people who want to collaborate to make something better. And so in a lot of ways, it's the same. I dress more like an adult when I go to work now. So other than that, it's interesting though. It's the big change to me is in advertising agencies, you are built to deal with ups and downs. And so a hard day is a normal day. And when I got, and fast timelines are are your normal. You don't really know of something where someone says, take a few weeks and think about that. And I can remember as I started and someone gave me an assignment and they said, and this is urgent. And so I stayed up all night and I got it done and I turned it in the next day and they were like, Amy, we meant like 2 weeks, like that, what are you doing? And so the pace is very different because there are so many stakeholders that make decisions. And it's, which now I realize, right, is why my clients needed everything so fast because they have a long cycle afterwards. And now I'm in the long cycle afterwards. So it's been a really interesting perspective. I feel like I should call my prior clients back and be like, if I was impatient, I'm sorry. But it's been overall a really a pleasant surprise. It's a different world, but in a lot of ways the same.
But from what I know, this role that you have now at Bank of America didn't necessarily exist before you got here. So what do you think? I mean, kudos to them, but what do you believe prompted them to create the role in the first place? I mean, there's such a traditional organization. It's nice to hear you say that they're so creative driven, though, for a financial institution. I think that's great. But I'm wondering what got them, to do this in the first place. You seem to be in very unique roles. I mean, at Droga, to have a chief intelligence officer was also very unique in a creative agency to have a CIO in that way. But now you're at Bank of America, where you also kind of took on this drastically novel role for them. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's sort of always been my way. I've always, it's what always attracts me to a job is where can I build something? I am always a person that says yes and then figures out if I could actually do it, right? That I'm always up for a challenge. And so I think that's what has driven my entire career. If you watched the path of it, it has been not traditional in any way. And so this was similar to that. They'd always had, I mean, it's a bank. There's always been research and modeling and analytics and everything. But I initially joined actually to be the head of research. And the thought was that there were researchers. There is global research, right, that talks, to investors, et cetera. There was internal research, but there had never been a cohesive effort and never at the table of the CMO. So there's like a CMO leader group and there are different representatives with different skill sets and no one had ever sat at that level doing research. And so I was the first. And the thought was really, how do we keep a closer pulse on how people are feeling? What are they thinking? What are they doing? How do they feel? And how does that inform the decisions we make? And before that, it was more reactive, right? It's what I like to say. People were asking answers. They would go to a research team, which was buried way down and say, can you tell me this thing? Or, can you give me this answer? And they wanted to change it to say, how do people say, I want to talk to someone about this, tell me about them. And so it was a very different perspective from ask me a thing to ask me a question. And so that was the idea as I came in. And so I came in to do that and really quickly moved us from this kind of almost a vendor shop in there because we had been in that answering answers position and doing really valuable work and having a lot of that, but not with a seat at the table to kind of strategically drive where decisions were going. And then I guess 6 weeks in, I also took on the analytics and modeling team. And so it was what was really exciting about that, because I like to jump into things, is that was also the first to bring those all together because we had on this one side a team that understood why people did things, and on another place we had what are they doing? And then in another, what will they do next? And yet we hadn't been thinking about them all together. And so when we asked a question, you would get a part of the answer, right? People feel this, or people do that, or people might do this next. But you got them in three separate places. And if you thought to ask all three places, you could get a really comprehensive answer. But by bringing them all together, we've been able to really change the way that we can help people, bring people to life. How do we really explain the situation a person's in? So it's been, I think, pieces that were all there, but brought together in a very different way that partners in a much more, what I would call a data strategy kind of way. How do you use it to make decisions, not just data for data?
So what was one of the first things that you focused on, when you pulled all of these together? What were some of the first steps to, I don't know, start shifting things towards this more comprehensive approach internally?
I realigned my teams was one of the first things. And we thought about how do you, with that concept of data strategy, how do you put a front line that is, you understand the business, you understand kind of the goals of that, the products, all of that, but you also have at your disposal a full set of tools. So you can now go into any type of person. You could get a researcher, a modeler, an analyst, et cetera, to be able to do that. so you use this comprehensive tool set and there's kind of a center point, right? It used to be if a question was asked, it went into literally 60 people, and everyone would say, I need this and I need that, I need that. And so now it comes into a central place and we go figure out what is the right combination of things. The other thing is I am a huge fan of democratizing data. I want people to have data in their hands. I want them to make decisions with it. And so a big emphasis on reporting and how do we get reporting and data in a way that feels comfortable for people that aren't data users? How do they have access to information at the same pace that we do, but in a visual that makes them understand it. So it's very easy to say, there's a thing I should focus on, rather than historically, I think people tend to use reporting or ask for reporting that is basically just a table of data,
Mhm.
which is great for people like me, but most people run screaming when they see that. And so this focus on shifting to a way we can put data in the hands of people where they're not afraid of the data and they'll actually use it. So I'd say those are kind of the big focuses that I've had over the last few months of trying to transform the team.
So was it a matter of going to the different stakeholder groups and kind of seeing what they need on a regular basis and building out, I don't know, the dashboards and things like that required?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of a learning plan. I think when you use resources like mine, the best is when you know the things you want to learn, and things will come up that'll be outside that. But if you can at the beginning map out and say, here are all the things we want to understand about why people do this thing, which things are most profitable, where do people need the most help, what kind of advice do people want, and the kinds of questions you want to answer. We partner with the product teams and the line of business partners to be able to understand that. Then I know how to use the resources for probably 80% of the work. And then we have the things where we're answering that a surprise comes up and we're trying to figure them out. But this concept of a learning plan helps us get really focused. And so we're prioritizing the things that matter to the business and to our clients, because it's the same, right? I'd consider them my clients just like I would have in an agency. And so I'm thinking through, what do they need to know? What keeps them up at night? How do I answer that? What do they need to succeed? And how do I use data to help them succeed more easily, faster, more efficiently? So I think that's probably been the big shift of focusing that, and then having a team that can say no to questions that don't make sense, that maybe aren't worth the work, because it's, data is tricky. You could literally answer anything, but not everything is worth knowing. And I think that's the thing of data is having a team that really understands that and says, I could get that for you, but like, what will you do with it if you know it? Is there anything you would change? And if no, it's probably not a thing I should focus on answering. Or if I would, but it affects 4 people, also probably not a thing I should focus on answering. And I think shifting that mentality of not just we should answer all the things because we can, but we should answer all the things because they'll help is a very different focus as well.
So for these folks that were so focused on either research or analytics or modeling or the different components of that, did you have to introduce them to the rest of the business to a large extent in order for them to understand more of it and be able to shift maybe from a reactive state to a more proactive state with what they were doing, what they were finding, what they were pushing to other departments, et cetera?
Surprisingly, for the most part, no.
Okay.
I have a brilliant team. I was lucky enough to inherit these like hardworking people that have taken it upon themselves to understand the business when people wouldn't, give them the background. They would go and seek it. They'd go search it and find people to answer their questions. And it's a friendly company, right? So you can go and say, teach me more about this to anyone, and they will. They'll take the time and tell you. And so I had a team of people that had gone and done that on their own free will to make sure that the work they were doing was better. And so I'd say for the most part, people knew, they just weren't called on in that way. So they were able to now use kind of the work and the skills they had done. There's certainly some of, we have access now to meetings and decisions that we wouldn't have before. And so there are definitely some parts where it's, if you let me in on this thing, I could help. And it's funny, it's, people like anywhere resist that at the beginning. And then as soon as they see what you can do, they're like, actually, now I want you in all my meetings. And you're like, no, we don't want to be in all of the things, just the things where we can help. So it's been really lucky because it's an open culture. People are, and it's probably back to your question of differences, right? I grew up in agencies where you kind of protect your thing. It is how you make your money, and you have your place and you collaborate kind of, but not fully. And here, because everyone is working towards the same thing in the same house, there is none of this. You just say, oh, great. If you have an answer, come in, like join it. And so it's literally just asking, can I come in, was all it took. And so now we're there.
It's interesting. I think some people might assume that maybe an agency is more open than a traditional bank, but I guess it's nice to hear that it's actually surprisingly open for what it is. And I like what you're talking about with this, let's say, like hub and spoke kind of thing. So you have this central area for all things data, and data strategy, and then it feeds into the other departments of the organization. So I'm wondering if I could pick your brain on maybe a few of those departments, just in terms of like what others expect you and your team to deliver, to them, and how they expect your work to feed into what they're doing. So if I was to take leadership, for example, as a first one, kind of what are their expectations, or where do you play the largest role in what they're doing?
I'd say for the most part, it is storytelling, which is what I love about it. What it is, what's consistent with what I did before is this idea to take a bunch of disparate facts and put them together and paint a story for someone to say, here's the thing you should understand. That this is your customer Amy, and here are all the things about her, and here's how she thinks and feels, and bringing that together. And that takes, when I think of like the spokes to the team, that takes, you have to understand the context. What is the world that we're marketing in? What is the broader scale things that are unrelated to even our category? And so having a
Mhm.
team that is understanding that, you have to understand, um, how would we measure that? How would we know if we did a thing and it was successful, and what the reaction would be, and are there messages or channels that work better? You have to have people that do reporting that can bring you that information. You have to have analysts that can say, I'll take all of that information and bring it together, and researchers that say, I'm going to go study people. I'm going to do ethnographies and watch how people make decisions in their natural life, or do a survey and ask them more about it. But it's, the hubs provide all of that information, but the center goal is to leaders is that storytelling of, here's how I would now describe in people words, as I like to say, instead of math words, which is, a natural tendency, I think, for a lot of people to do what I do, just to describe the situation someone's in.
Hmm. And for the creative team, for example, what are their expectations, or how do you interact with them on a regular basis?
Um, Very much, from the beginning, we do kind of annual planning and understand, here are all the challenges, here's everything we're setting out, and we all work as a team to look at that and say, here's all the different aspects. But then with the creative team, it is bringing that person to life. Who are we talking to? How do I bring it to life? I mean, it's in years of working with creative, the number of briefs I've seen that say, it's women 25 to 54, and they're like, great, that's super helpful. And so I think it's not only describing what are people doing and thinking, but it's that how are they feeling? What are the emotions? What are the things I have to trigger to be able to make them make a decision, or to be open to talking, or seeking advice? And I think that's where it's been really helpful to work, I think I'd say, across my career with creatives, is to say, how do I truly understand how that person's feeling? Like, do they need to get really excited about something? Do they need to feel a little nervous to make that next step? What do I want them to feel before they do that? And understanding that the journey that people take, I think that's the really most valuable part of offering to creatives, is how do I put that into the material, rather than just, the demographic description of who I am. There are a lot of people that fit my demographic description. And if that's all you knew about me, most every message you sent at me would be a miss. But if you instead knew, when do I get really nervous and that prompts me to do something? And when do I get really nervous and it stops me from doing something?
Mhm.
That changes how you would want to talk to me. And so that's the part we really try to focus on, of, how do we bring that whole person to life, rather than just the descriptive parts of them.
Can you talk a little bit about this, let's say, less tangible side of data, like emotional triggers and reactions? Like how does Bank of America quantify these, or even put them in relation to other types of data? Can you give us like some tangible examples?
Yeah, sure. And I'd say it's probably consistent with what a lot of people do. Social media is a great way to be able to understand emotions, because you can really start, and you can do natural language processing. And there's so many tools out there now where you can start understanding emotions. So many of the tools that you just off the shelf can use will start breaking down conversation and understanding the emotion that's sitting behind them. And so that's one very easy way. We also do a lot of survey where we keep a regular pulse on people, to be able to ask, kind of these 40 things, how are you feeling in this moment? And so we'll do a regular pulse of that, so we can also see how things are shifting. With the
Hmm.
pandemic, understanding the idea of optimism is really important to us right now. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was literally none, and there was a little glimmer of it where people felt optimism again. And I'm talking maybe like a quarter to a third of people felt it, but then you see it drop off, and it drops off so highly correlated to other things that got you. So test rates drive optimism. Now I just have to watch test rates, and I can tell you, in a person's area, if they're likely to be optimistic or not. And so it's connecting the dots to figure out not only what is the emotion they're feeling, because things like social media and surveys can help you do that, and ethnographies, et cetera. But then what triggers those emotions is the more important part. So I know now proactively to say, you haven't yet told me how you feel, but I know this is happening. This is the context you're in, and this is the emotion you're likely feeling because of it, because we've studied them so long. And I think that's really important in order to help people make decisions.
And you feel that people are pretty responsive? I mean, I think in the marketing conversation, we're always talking about how, oh, surveys aren't what they used to be, and they don't work as well, and people aren't as responsive as they used to be, and the noise and the noise and the noise. So how do you make sure that you get to enough people to have some kind of conclusive, I was going to say conclusive conclusion.
It's a good question. We don't use one survey. So when we've been doing a COVID tracker for 8 months now, that runs on a weekly basis. It used to run on a daily basis, that tells us a lot of things about how people are feeling and what they're thinking and what they're doing in that. But we're running that in so many different places. So some of that are platforms where you answer 2 questions, and some of that are surveys where you answer 45-minute survey. And so having that combination of ways so that we can see, do we get a consistent answer when we ask people a lot versus when we ask them a question or 2 questions, and so that I have a variety of answers and types of people. So I don't just get people who take surveys for a living because they have 45 minutes and they can get points or whatever they can do, but also people where they just for fun, when you ask them a one-off question in a context where they're already thinking about that thing, that works. So I think it's also the types of survey tools you use, and having a variety of them is really important, because you're right, one alone is risky. Having a bunch helps, and different types of sources, some that are from us, some that are blind, and so people don't know who's asking. I think there's a lot of things you can use to control that. So if my bank said to me, do you feel optimistic, versus if a magazine I read asked me, I'd probably give a different answer. And I'm not sure which one would be more or less optimistic, but that varies by person. But having that combination to be able to say, when something more official asks, I feel this way, and when something less official asks, I feel this way, is also helpful. So it's bringing all of that together and really carefully moderating to make sure you have all those samples.
I'm assuming this ties back into what everybody's trying to do with becoming more human in the way they communicate anyways, to hopefully achieve that kind of comfort level, regardless of whether you're Bank of America or Elle or I don't know what other magazine.
Yeah.
I'm wondering now, what about product innovation? How do you step into that, and what is the kind of information that you're trying to feed that team?
Mostly it's interesting. I would have expected coming in that you would always be talking about product features, and you do, right? You have to understand, I'd say there's 3 parts. If you want to think about building a product, there's step 1 of what are the needs, right? You can't build a product and then hope it works. There has to be a need, and then the product has to be created. So when I think of in a person's life, needs that they indicate or that we observe is step 1. So research around that. Step 2 is now, what does it have to be competitive? So if I want to do this thing, what makes it better than the thing that they could already get from somewhere else, if that exists, or what is it replacing if that doesn't exist? And then step 3, and I think this is a piece a lot of people forget, is how do you articulate that? What are the words you use to say that, right? So if I looked at a product thing that someone's selling, a deposit account would word something, that's going to be very different than how I as a consumer go seeking that thing. Or if you think in an easy example, right, you might have a high yield savings account. If I'm an average consumer, like, I don't really know what you're talking about when you say that. I don't mean to say consumers aren't smart, but if it said that you were like, I need an account that I'm not going to mess with, where I can get a lot of money back for just leaving my money there, that's a very easy articulation. I understand what the thing offers versus high yield savings account. And I think people often don't take that last step. They talk about it in the terms of how they think about the product, not in terms of how it fills, it's back to that need piece, how it fills the need that they have. I need something, or I might need something that is flexible. So I might need something that might be, a lower yield, but I have the ability to move money in and out day to day, minute to minute. And so that when I talk about it, I'm not going to describe it as, a transaction-based low yield account, robot arms, right? I'm going to talk about it in a thing that it does for me. And I think that's really important. So I'd say all three of those parts for product development are really important.
And is there any, because I've asked you kind of what people expect of you, but is there anything that you expect from all of these teams then, leadership, creative, content, product, etc., information for them to give back to you as well in order to merge with whatever you're already kind of in the process of doing?
Yeah, there's two things. One is back to that concept of ask me an actual question. And I hold the line really hard on that because I think if people tell me what are they solving for, I can do a really good job of answering. If they say, can you tell me this fact? Like I can, of course, I can do it really well and really fast. Um, but that doesn't actually maybe help them. So I think that's the one. But the other is help me understand how you're going to use the information. If that is I have to create a report that goes to someone, and so I just need it as a fact. I'm
Yeah.
going to focus on that differently than if I'm going to, in real time, determine in a digital space offers I want to give to someone, right? If you said, tell me the performance of what are our top 100 offers last year? If that's just I want to estimate the value of those and how much money we spend on offers, that's one thing. If that's, I want to determine which offers I should consider for this next year and which audiences like each one of them, that's a very different thing. And so this very initial question is important to understand, but also how I'm going to use the information when I have it and if I'm going to use it. But then the feedback too of we build a lot of things, right? If you think about what data does, it builds functionally optimizations, right? It's knowing all the things I know, what is the best decision I'm going to make. And so knowing then, did that work for people? So if I said, 10 different facets of information, and you can kind of, flip the lever on each one of them accordingly, which of those worked best for you? Which of them maybe didn't? Like, did you never use this part of the information? And how did it help when you were talking to your clients or when you were serving information or when you were briefing a team? How did that feel? Did it feel like you had the right? Having that kind of qualitative understanding is really important.
I'm curious because we talked a lot about let's say external, like customers and things like this, but do you also work on internal stuff as well with employees and how things are going and trying to get a pulse and a sense of that as well?
Yep. Our team does a little bit of everything. And I say historically, because we sit in marketing, so we've historically done how do we understand clients, consumers, customers. But we also, as we think of COVID, for example, we build the trackers that look at what are regulations state by state and how do we think about if we should open our offices or not? What are illness rates? What are test rates? What are hospitalization rates? When is it safe? What is the average commute time? What is the commute channel? And how do we bring together all that information to say, maybe I could open this building, but not that building. And so you use data for a thing like that, or as everyone moves home, where do we send technology first? If we have to now deploy laptops to people that didn't have them when they left, who needs it first? How do we do that? And so it is amazing the number of things that data decides. And so we do a lot of that. And then understanding our employees and what makes them happy is a huge part of what we do. And so there's a lot of employee satisfaction work that's put into that is across so many different facets, what makes you like or not like working here and all of the questions that go with that. And how do we report that back so that it's actionable, so that it stays a place that people want to work, and that we understand what drives people to show up every day and to work hard every day. So it's exciting because the team really could do that same skill set applies in a million ways. And it's a nice part when you hire a person for that, you think you might be hiring them for creative messaging, and you are, but they might also determine, where technology goes, how satisfied are people, et cetera. So it's exciting that you can use the same skill set in a lot of ways. I think it makes it also, if you're thinking about adding that as a skill set, makes it a lot less scary, right? You get a lot more mileage out of it than I think you initially think you might when you say, I'm going to hire a creative data person. They're like, yes, that's very important. It's scary to invest in just that, particularly if you haven't had it and your things have been going really well. But then you realize, oh, I could also use that person to help me with this problem and this problem and this problem. It becomes a lot less scary to add that into your roster.
I'm always super interested in how people build their feedback loops. I think this is it's always interesting to hear, and you mentioned surveys, and I'm assuming that that also counts internally as well, to a certain extent. But I'm wondering if there's anything else. I mean, are there just random places where you put certain things to just get some quick bits of information, whether it be from people inside or outside the organization? I just find that a feedback strategy is, I don't know, people hand it in 7 million different ways, and they either do it very simply, it feels like, or they've really thought it through. There seems to be no, there seems to be no middle ground there. So I'm assuming that you're on the end that has really thought it through, given your role. So I'm wondering if there's anything else that you can add there beyond the the versatility of surveys, which I can understand.
Yeah, I think there's a lot where, I always laugh when when you go in the bathroom at the airport and they have the smiley face sign of like, how clean was your bathroom? And you're like,
Exactly. See things like that.
but it's such a great tool because you're like, that was gross. You could just like, actually, you don't want to touch it because it was gross. And maybe it's false information, right? But this concept of that you could just give an answer really rapidly and that it's a single thing and that it's an experience. If you emailed me a survey from the airport that said, how was your experience in the bathroom? I would never open that.
Yeah.
Nor would I respond to it. But if I'm right there and I'm walking by, that's very easy to do. So I think there's that. There's also, focus groups or one-on-ones and just understanding or ethnography, so I can actually follow people around. That sounds so creepy, but so I can observe people in their natural habitat to see how did they use that, right? So if they sign up for a product, if it's a client, do they understand it? If I watch them in their life, does it ever, they got a new debit card, do they use it? How do they use it? When do they think of that? When they pull out their wallet, how do they think about which thing to do? And observing that behavior is oftentimes more helpful than if I had said, how do you determine which card you're going to use when you open your wallet? Like, I don't know. Like, no one thinks about that when they do it. It's a natural. Like, is it because it's literally the top? Is it because the color? Is it because you use a different card for each thing? And
Rewards,
you don't think about
points,
that.
things
Rewards.
like this.
But when you start watching people and then have the opportunity to ask them, hey, why'd you just do that? You get a much different answer. And so I think that's really important too, to just situationally observe how people are doing things and what they're doing, and to be able to observe that way. But I think it's, give people a variety of ways to answer if it's all one. The other part is, when you think about satisfaction, people pretend like it's binary. You're satisfied or you're not satisfied.
Mm.
And I think that's insane. And because it isn't that simple, right? I could have been very unsatisfied with the outcome, but I thought the person was very helpful and my wait time for something was okay, right? And so if I just ask, were you satisfied? I'm probably going to get a median, like an average score. They're probably going to be like, nah, it was okay. I don't know what to do with that. It doesn't tell me anything. But if I break that down and say, did you get the outcome you wanted? Did you like the person that you talked to? Did you, like, as you start picking that apart and asking them more questions, then you can actually do something with it. But if I just know, like, I was average satisfied, that you're like, okay, great. Like, I don't know what to do with that information. It doesn't help me. So I think that's the other part, is that people, you can't ask these very like broad, generic questions because they don't do anything for you.
This is similar to what Dominic was talking about as well, because they have their vulnerability strategy at CG42, and I asked him point blank. I was like, "What do you think of NPS?" And he's like, "I don't think that's the metric that we should all be using." And it sounds, somewhat similar, yet you guys explained it differently. That it can't be as simple as, "Would you recommend me or not?"
Yeah.
Sure, I don't know.
Yeah.
1 to 10. It's hard. Yeah, like you say, it's hard to say. And it's hard to identify the moments where customers are forgiving,
Yes.
where it's something that has happened that is negative, but they're forgiving because of X, Y, and Z other reasons that they think about your brand. Well, what are those X, Y's, and Z's that have ultimately shifted, the scale in order for me to be able to go on as a brand that you love, let's say.
Yeah.
I think that's where the complexity is. And so an NPS is just not,
it doesn't, you have to understand the drivers of it. And when you look into it, it's again that human piece, like in a relationship, right? If someone shows up late for lunch every
Hmm.
time, if they have a lot of equity because we've been friends for 20 years and I just know that's who they are, I don't care. I mean, that bothers me, but it doesn't change our relationship, right? So translate that to people. So maybe that means that my clients that I've had for a very long time have a little more forgiveness. And so
Hmm.
they're going, so which also is important because I have to know that to know that an 8 for them might actually really only be a 6.
Yeah.
So I have to break that apart and say how much of that is just because you're willing to take crap from me versus you know you actually felt satisfied with a thing, and understanding those individual drivers. Or it's, I used to laugh when I saw the survey question, is a brand that I, yeah, how is it worded, is a brand I'd relate to, or is a brand for me? And I was like, that is such a dumb question. um and like the more I think about that question, the more it's a brand I'd be friends with, is the kind of thing you want to understand, right? Because now when I think about that, it's so important. I look at the world today and how much the world is changing and how much people are demanding of brands. I have to actually like the brand. So they could do everything right. They could have a beautiful store, they could have great pricing, good service, etc. But if I don't like what they represent, none of those scores are going to work. Everything is going to be pulled down by this, like, I just wouldn't be friends with you. Doesn't matter how great you are. And that's so important to understand. But I used to laugh when people ask that question. But now it's the context of what do those other answers mean? It's so important.
Hmm. It's interesting because and this is where the qualitative side of data is radically important, right? So you can start to almost package these back into something quantitative that you can ultimately use on a regular basis. But I feel like if location, or let's say the moment the experience is happening, is so vastly important, then for you guys it must be really hard right now because one of the most important locations is the bank. And given, I don't know, I'm assuming decreasing foot traffic and all this stuff that's going on because of COVID, either this is giving you a chance to rethink and maybe invest in some of the new technology and the new ways you want to continue to build those spaces, or it's something else. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about that. How are you guys thinking of the actual physical space in terms of, yeah, in terms of the information that you're gathering, and like I was saying, the feedback loops and things like that for the future, and even for now, I guess, in such a difficult time.
It's interesting. One of the things that we look at a lot is, do people intend to ever go back to in person? Will you ever go back to a retail bank? And so understanding that, and we ask that in a lot of ways. I ask it in a survey, but we also ask that in, online forums, and just trying to
Mm-hmm.
get a read on what will ever be your comfort level. There's certain things that it's people that you're never going to do, that it might take you years to do. And so understanding how comfortable people feel and what it takes for people to feel comfortable, but also understanding that the what has always made a retail bank work, right, being live and in person, is the relationship aspect. I know my teller, I know my person,
Mm-hmm.
they do this thing for me, and then how do you replicate that digitally? And I think we've done a lot of work already to do that, but I think it's making it even more personal, right? We're in the same place all companies are. I understand the cues, it's back to that same description of like the functional cues of I do this and then I do that. But how do I now put emotion into that so that I still understand how you're feeling? Did you feel nervous when you did that? And so you start looking at new metrics. You know, did I linger on that longer? Did I look confused? You can start incorporating eye tracking to understand. Did I look a little panicked when I got to that part of a transaction? And so you've got to
Mm-hmm.
find other ways. And I think they were there, people were using them, we were using them, but they're just so much more important because you don't get that live feedback of I'm frustrated, I'm confused, I'm comfortable, I'm not comfortable. So it's, what are the proxies for that, and how do you read that to make sure you understand, and give people a chance to tell you that? I think is really important. Things like chat are so important. How do I give someone a chance to say, like, help, I'm stuck right here, or I don't know what to do, I don't know where to turn. Those things become more and more important, and how we evolve those tools as an industry is so important because it's, people are using them differently. It used to be, I used chat for a very functional, tactical thing. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's not, because what we're replacing in the in-person experience is the things that aren't functional and tactical. If I knew exactly what the question was, I wouldn't be chatting with you. I would have gone online originally. So how do I now make chat understand that? so that I can roundabout ask a thing and it can still understand what I want. So I think that's evolving for our category.
Are you at all worried, given your role, are you at all worried about increasing data privacy and this whole monster of a discussion that is increasingly happening around, are we going towards a cookieless world, cookieless marketing, et cetera, et cetera? How do you think about that, especially with something that is so delicate like financial information, which is, I think, just a whole nother playing field.
I'm terrified about it. Like everyone is. There's so much. The problem is there's so much change coming, and it's inevitable. But there's also so much to know about it and to learn about it and to understand how to navigate. And I think what we do well, and I think it's when I see brands doing it well, is putting the customer first in that. Of what is the best experience from them from a data standpoint, and how do we understand that for them. If these are the regulations I have to follow, that's going to limit some of what I can do for people. So what do I have to do now to make up for that? I have to understand that. So I have to start thinking about and learning, when I don't know factors A and B, what am I going to use to replace them, so that people still feel like I understood them and could help them, right? It's a weird world where you're like, I don't want you to know anything about me, but I want you to know everything about me. And so it's a hard challenge, but I think
I'm annoyed when you don't talk to me like you know me, but I also don't want to give you this information.
Yeah, there is no winning in this scenario, but I get it. It's funny. For what I do for a living, I have open data access on everything because I understand what it does for me as a person. And so, it's people, we were talking ancestry, DNA, and people were like, you said yes, they could keep it. And I'm like, yeah, what if it saves someone's life someday? And they were like, but they'll know your DNA. And I was like, yeah, but it could save someone else's life if they test with it. And I was like, but I get the end use of the thing. But I think, so there's understanding what do I have for proxies, but also how do we educate people about what we actually do with information? I mean, I didn't say it at the beginning. I don't know how I would forget. It's one of the biggest differences working inside a bank is the amount of regulation around what I can and cannot do and what I can know and not know is immense. And consumers are more protected in a bank, I would say, anywhere, because the regulation is so tight about what I can know about an individual person. It sits somewhere, but in very few cases could one person know all of the things about an individual. It is separated. It is, someone could know this, but not that. And it is very well thought out about how it's built and what it takes to be compliant there. But so I think there's that, and just how do you separate the lines of information so that it can stay in line with kind of the framework we're given. But also, how do I now figure out what are the new things I want? How do I do more opt-in things? How do I, we have, I think, the largest customer panel in the country of being able to, on a daily basis, reach our customers, but they've all opted in and said, I'm willing to tell you these things. I'm willing to let you observe these things. And building that trust and helping them understand and giving them the feedback loop of, when you tell me this, look at the things I changed. So your feedback helped us accomplish these things this year, so that they have a feedback loop of like, is it worth telling someone the thing? Because you don't want to ask someone something or observe something and then do nothing or have them feel that you did nothing. So I think people are going to use their customer panels more and more. I think we're going to find a lot more proxies for what we used to be able to observe but can't anymore.
Do you ever find that the data tells you something that you, for whatever reason, just choose to ignore?
It's, to me, the hardest part in hiring for data people is human intuition. So in an example way from the beginning of my career, which I think is the most clear, we were building for the Marine Corps, we were building models that said, where are you most likely to get recruits from? And that was based on a bunch of factors, but and the best recruits, but within that, it would have to include how likely they are to do a thing, how likely they are to score a certain thing on their physical test, on their written test, et cetera, et cetera. And the team that did the work initially came back and said, we believe this province in Puerto Rico is where we're going to get our recruits from. And I was like, really? Because just on a population, like that's my only really, on a population count, as a market, that's not large enough to be my number one source of recruits. Even if I take every person that's eligible, it isn't enough, right? And so I think there's like the data said that, and so did it, right? There's question one of like, you probably missed something in there. So you have to like actually think about the thing is step one, because sometimes the data can tell you anything you want it to tell it, right? It's how you manipulate it, how you navigate it. And so that's really important that it makes sense, the thing that you see. But the other is, is I think I work with relationship managers, right? And
Mhm.
I can tell them how a person is likely to behave, but they also have relationships. I mean, they're relationship managers, they know the people. And so I teach them to use the things that we build as a guideline, but not as the rule. I want their common sense in there. I want them to understand that, I could, whether to advertise in the pandemic, I could
Mhm.
ask people how appropriate it is, and people will say yes. But my instinct said at the beginning, like, no, that's probably not the right question. So I heard them say yes, it was okay, but no, it's not okay. I should have been asking them, like, what are the things that even can penetrate outside of like, oh my gosh, am I going to be okay? Right. I should have been asking them that to determine it, not to ask them the question. And so I think it's important to think about all of those things when you're thinking through, like, what do you really decide to take the information? And is there, if I scratched a level in, was there something behind that that actually drove the answer I got or the observation I got, right? It's so easy to say, I can see people, they're, let's say there's a run on ATMs because they are closing markets again,
Mhm.
right? I could observe that in data and say, oh my gosh, we have to stock up our ATMs massively. But if I drill down, I might actually see that's only a certain age group and it's only in certain markets. And then I'm like, never mind, we're okay, everything's fine. But it'd be very easy to misstep and say, this is the thing I should observe and pay attention to. And then you're like, never mind, it's okay. So I think you have to think of, why that thing is happening. And then the human intuition is so important in that. And I think it's why I've always worked in creative, right? It
Mhm.
is the combination of that art and that science of understanding people as a person and understanding people as data. You can't, one alone is not enough. You have to have that human intuition to pair with it, the empathy to put with it to actually get useful information.
That's what I was going to ask next is given your work at Droga and what you were talking about in your presentation, do you find that at Bank of America, the creatives also maybe sometimes feel like big data is, killing creativity a bit when it comes to marketing? Do you feel like it's a similar level or a similar, how should I say it, like breakdown of who does and who doesn't, or is it different at Bank of America given that everybody, I would say, maybe understands the value of data a bit more just because it's a financial institution? It might be a little bit clearer, but then again, I'm just assuming at this point, you know better than I do.
I'd say I find everywhere that the initial interaction I have with a creative person is no, thank you. They're very polite, right? And and I think it is hard to find data people that have empathy, right? And that makes data people sound horrible. We're lovely people. But what I mean by that is people that are willing to say, like, the data said that, but just ignore it, keep going. Or, data isn't just X's and O's, it's, ones and twos. It is how a person feels and thinks. And so if a creative person has interacted with a person that is in that kind of very data way, the instinct is no. I don't
Mhm.
know, thank you. I'll pass. I've got it. I understand people. Most every person I've dealt with it then sees really what I want to try to do. And that's true on any side, is very open to data. And I'd say, uh, creatives working on banking, same. It's the
Yeah.
same as they are everywhere. People, you become a creative because you understand people and you want to be able to communicate with them in a way that gets them excited and inspires them. And that's not different in financial category than it is in anything else I've worked in.
True.
It's giving people data in a way that is useful. So, right, if I give them a chart of numbers, no one wants that. I don't even want that. So certainly if I'm a creative person, I don't want it. But also, we I we gave an example once, talking to a creative team as I first met them, is when I walked into Droga and I met the chief creative officer at the time and said, and he was like, no, I don't want you to meet my team. And I was like, I'd like to come to your staff meeting. I want to talk to them. And he was like, I'm good. Yeah, I'll pass. Um, turned we later became very good friends, by the way. But as we went, and I was like, okay, but let me just, here's the thing. we're working on a telecom client. I can give you this brief that says, I want women 25 to 54. Here you go, like create a brief. And I was like, or I can give you this one. And basically all you then can assume about them is, right, like it's a phone service. So like they probably know other people and they probably have ears or hands because like that's literally all you know about them. You have no other things to infer. I was like, but what if I instead told you it's actually just women 30 to 32 and they're recent mothers and they're always in a little bit of a panic because they don't have information at their hands and they want to connect with people that are like them because they feel alone. Now what would you do for a creative? And they were all like, I have goosebumps now. And I was like, yeah, now go create. I've now given you, using data, that extra bit of understanding that human that you want to talk to, versus just, even if I had just said they're 30 to 32, you're like, okay. Even if I'd said their moms, okay. When you start adding in that, how do they feel? You can do something with it. You can inspire someone. And I think that's the part that's important, is helping people realize that's the thing you're doing. It's that extra mile of detail that helps them really connect with people.
And
And that's true of any category.
do you lean on the CMO to help kind of bring these two camps closer together and give you the extra support that you need to make sure that you have that conversation and kind of get to prove your your worth, so to speak?
For me, I'm really pushy, so I usually just will force my way into that. But I'd say our CMO is great. She understands the importance of creative, but she also understands the importance of insights that drive that. She's very much a collaborator. She brings people together to make decisions. It's, it's called the CMO group. So it's not her and then other people. It's a team of people that make decisions based on a individual expertise brought together to make decisions. So I think her culture is very much one of collaboration, which makes it really easy, right? You don't work there if you have any assumption that you're going to do anything other than collaborate. She builds that from the very beginning, which is kind of awesome.
Is there something about data and analytics that you wish more brands would pay attention to as a whole?
I still think people think of it as measurement. People think of it as measurement or reporting. And so as soon as you say data, they're like, oh, you do reporting. And you're like, yes, sure. And I think it's the thing people think they need first. I would argue it's the opposite. People need insights first. If you're doing insights well, things will perform better. Like, yes, you should also measure that and know that. But like, if you could do one, I would focus it on the front end, not on the back end. I think brands tend to and agencies were like this, or that everyone is like that, want to give creatives that free reign and spin a little bit. So I encourage people to bring data further up in a process, even in a business decision. Understanding people makes better business decisions. It makes better creative decisions. It makes better everything decisions. So I'd say the earlier people could bring it, I wish that they would, and stop focusing on the measurement as the first priority, because it's important, right? It has to work, but they're so highly connected. There's so much data, ironically, that proves that insights drive performance. that using data makes better experiences, makes better business. So I would push people to embrace it a little bit more, and to let the people in the room. There's also this very much, I get it. Like, I am a data person. I employ a lot of data people, and the instinct is like, sure, we'll just take your information and bring it in. But what you miss in that is, to the earlier point, people that work in data in a team like this that are about consumer understanding truly understand people, and they want to tell you the thing. They want to bring together all the information, and putting them in a room and letting them do that, you learn so much more than if you said, make me a slide and I'll carry it in for you. Because it literally, it's the biggest challenge I have, right? Everyone wants to give me an 80-page deck because they know so much, and I'm like, no. I'd like more concise information. But if you just let the people in and kind of let them go for 5 minutes, they've painted this picture of a person much more than if you just, let them pass over the 2 facts you need.
That's so nice. So then how do you, as a data person, ultimately feel you're, let's say, feeding into the larger purpose of the brand that you work for? Do you actively see your role contributing to the larger like the grander scheme of things when it comes to Bank of America?
I really do. I think one of the things I love is as I started my interview process intending to never work there and ended it working there, um, what I realized is, right, our mission is to make financial lives better. And literally all of the things I do are in pursuit of that. That it is, I can keep people safer. I can get them access to the things they need by not putting them in the place where they are. I can determine that they might need this kind of advice at this moment, or that they might need to interact in this kind of way, that they might be afraid of that and not ready for that. That just because they have a life trigger doesn't mean that we have to talk to them about it. Like I truly am helping them make their financial lives better. And I think um, I think that's right, a sign of a brand that has a good purpose, a good, it's, I think you heard me talk about it from my days at Droga, is having a really clear brand purpose. Any brand that has that, as a data person, it's really fun to work on because you know the thing you're going for and everything you do is in pursuit of that. It is holding true to that purpose. And so I get to keep doing that. We have a clear purpose and I have a clear set of rules that make that the number one thing that it always comes down to. Should I do this or should I not?
Hmm. That's so nice. I'm glad to hear that it's going so well, to be honest. And I know you are such a big fan of Droga that even I was
Huge.
surprised when you told. Yeah, I think everyone was
I
surprised.
was
But it's nice to see, I don't know, it's nice to flourish in a different environment, and it's nice to see that it's going so well and that you were able to build such a team and have such an impact. I think it's huge. Um, and I can say that it's working. I am a Bank of America client, so I've watched now,
Yay.
knowing that you're there. I'm watching all the time. What emails do I get? What are they telling me? What is happening? Because I associate it with you now. So I can definitely say that it's I would it's I can feel the brand somewhat changing, to be honest, even in this time. So it's nice to witness from an outside point of view. Um, and I know we only have a few minutes left, but I think maybe the last thing I would ask you is just overall, when it comes to your field of expertise, what are you most excited about? What is I don't know, the next development or the next trend or the next big push that you're excited to implement, to work on, to be part of? Um,
That a really easy answer is that there's actual education in the thing that I do now. I stumbled into this as a career because I'm a math person that wanted to be a creative person but has no creative skills, right? So I I found my way. I found a place to belong, but that we're raising a generation of students that is learning this in school and learning to think this way and learning to use data creatively is so exciting to me because when I look at some of the innovation that comes from these newer people coming in, and even within my team, people that are established and have been there 20 years, but the ability to rethink all of the ways we've done things before and how to use data differently, and not to say this metric, but actually when I combine these 8 metrics, what does that mean? How would that help me understand something? I think the innovation that is there, if I think of where we are on an arc, we're so at the bottom of what we can achieve doing this because, right, we're like to the people accepted we exist phase,
mhm.
as an industry, and certainly within creative, right? And so it's how do we take that, I think, is what's exciting. When I went to Droga, I went because I thought if I could work in the most creative agency in the world as a data person, like, okay, we're progressing.
Mhm.
And I did. I thrived there. My team thrived there. They were welcoming, not at the beginning for some of them, but for the most part, everyone was really welcoming. And I think where now we get to go, right now we've established like it might be worth having us. The possibilities are unlimited with what people can do when you just apply data to better decisions and different ways to process it and use it. I'm so excited about what we can do.
That's super sweet. Well, we're at time, so I don't want to keep you any longer. I know you have more than enough to do, given everything that's going on. But I have to say thank you once more for joining us and for talking about this and being so open about your experience on both fronts. The creative and the agency and the brand side. So I really, really appreciate it, and I thank everyone that joined us today as well. I'm glad you were here to see one of the loveliest, I think, ladies that I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. when it comes to our industry. So I hope you enjoyed it. Tomorrow we take a little break from lives, not necessarily because of Thanksgiving, but scheduling just ended up working out that way. But we'll be back on Friday with another live. So definitely check out the schedule on rebelsrulers.com. And we also have the master classes still going on tomorrow and until next week, I think Tuesday. So definitely keep tuning in. And Amy, thank you so much. Really, I appreciate it. And I'm sure I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for the chance to come and get to talk.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. Anytime. So until then, until next time, guys, Amy, I don't know. I'd say to everybody, have a good day, and I'll see you guys soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.